The colony marketplace of Outer Rim Station 12 was crowded when Brenner first heard the cry for help. Among the usual chaos of merchants hawking synthetic goods and travelers discussing trade routes, a voice cut through, desperate, ancient, carrying the weight of something beyond monetary transaction. Brenner was browsing vendor stalls when he noticed her. An impressive being of crystalline structure, her form translucent and shimmering, her movements deliberate, despite obvious distress. She was addressing the crowd directly, her voice modulating through frequencies that made most humans uncomfortable. Brenner watched as trader after trader turned away, shaking their heads before she'd even finished explaining. Her obvious desperation only seemed to repel them further. "My daughter will not survive the breeding cycle," the alien woman was saying, her crystalline form flickering with colors that seemed to indicate distress. "Our species requires specific genetic compatibility. Without it, she will enter a state of deterioration that leads to death. We have traveled to 17 colonies seeking assistance, but no species will even consider." She trailed off as another potential helper walked away. Brenner felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of genuine suffering, awareness that this being had nowhere else to turn. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "My name is Brenner," he said quietly. "I'm listening to what you're saying. What exactly are you asking?" The alien woman's entire structure seemed to contract with relief. Her colors shifted to something resembling hope. "You will hear me? You will not reject my plea outright?" Her enormous eyes, multifaceted and deep, fixed on him with an intensity that was almost overwhelming. "I am Senna, and this is my daughter, Kestra." Kestra emerged from behind her mother's crystalline form. She was smaller, younger, with the same translucent quality, but with slightly warmer coloration, blues and purples instead of her mother's silvery whites. She seemed shy, uncertain, her movements hesitant as she stepped into Brenner's view. "Our species reproduces through a specific biological process," Senna explained, her voice becoming more measured as she sensed Brenner wasn't immediately rejecting her. "We require genetic material compatible with our own. Without proper mating, during the breeding season, Kestra will enter metabolic collapse. The process is painful, and it leads to death within months if unresolved." Brenner felt his pulse accelerate. He understood what Senna was asking, and he understood why others had refused. The implications were substantial. Bonding with an alien species, engaging in reproduction across species lines, committing to something that would fundamentally alter his life. "How long do we have?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. He wasn't saying yes, not yet, but he wasn't saying no either. 3 weeks, Senna replied, her colors shifting back toward that desperate state. "In 3 weeks, the breeding cycle will activate, and if she has not bonded with a compatible genetic partner, her transformation will begin. There is no stopping it, no treatment that works. We have tried everything." Brenner looked at Kestra, really looked at her. She was watching him with an expression that was hard to read on such an alien face, but something in her demeanor suggested uncertainty, fear, perhaps hope. She was facing death through no fault of her own, trapped by biology that had nothing to do with choice or desire. "Come with me," Brenner said finally. "Both of you. Let me understand this better before making any decisions." Brenner spent the next week learning everything he could about Kestra's species. He consulted with Polony medical advisors, accessed genetic databases, and most importantly, spent time with Senna and Kestra, listening to them explain their culture, their physiology, their desperation. What he learned was both fascinating and deeply troubling. Kestra's species, the Sithrani, had evolved as a monogendered collective. They reproduced through a complex biological process where one individual would enter a cyclical state, requiring genetic material from a compatible partner to prevent metabolic collapse. Without proper bonding, the process became catastrophic, ultimately fatal. It is not like human reproduction, Senna explained as they sat in Brenner's private quarters. It is more fundamental. It is survival integrated into our biological code. Kestra is not just entering sexual maturity. She is entering a life or death transition that only mating with a genetically compatible partner can resolve. "And you're saying I'm genetically compatible?" Brenner asked, trying to sound clinical despite the racing of his heart. "Our genetic analysis suggests remarkable compatibility," Senna confirmed. "Unusual for cross-species pairing, but your species has the right molecular structure, the correct amino acid sequences. You could provide what Kestra needs to survive the transition." Kestra had remained silent throughout most of these conversations, but Brenner noticed she listened intently, her crystalline form flickering with subtle color shifts. He was beginning to recognize as emotional responses. One day, after her mother had retired to the guest quarters, Kestra approached him hesitantly. "May I sit with you?" she asked, her voice softer than her mother's, containing different harmonic frequencies that suggested youth. "Of course," Brenner replied, gesturing to the seat beside him. They sat in awkward silence for several minutes before Kestra spoke again. "My mother believes this is purely biological necessity. She believes you are simply a means to survival. But I have spent time observing your species, learning your patterns. I believe it could be more than that." Brenner's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I have read your literature, listened to your music, watched how your kind interacts when driven by something beyond survival. You call it love. I do not know if such a thing is possible for someone like me, but I have begun to wonder." Kestra's color shifted to a warm amber. "I have begun to hope that what might need to happen between us could be something that feels like what I have read in your books." Something in Brenner's chest twisted painfully. "Kestra, I need to be honest with you. What your mother is asking, it would mean bonding with you, creating something intimate and permanent. It's not something I can do just to save your life. That wouldn't be fair to either of us." "I understand," Kestra said softly. "But what if it could be something more? What if we could create something real between us? Would that change your answer?" Brenner stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars beyond the station. The answer was already forming in his heart, even though his mind fought against it. He was being asked to choose between his own species' expectations and something genuinely unprecedented. He was being asked to commit to a being so fundamentally different from himself that reproduction would require genetic science at the edges of possibility. When he turned back to face Kestra, he saw her watching him with such hope in her enormous eyes that he knew his decision was already made. Over the following days, Brenner and Kestra spent every possible moment together. Senna, recognizing the shift in her daughter's demeanor, stepped back from organizing their bonding, allowing them space to develop something genuine. Brenner discovered that Kestra possessed a keen intelligence and a perspective shaped by an entirely different evolutionary path. She asked him endless questions about human culture, about music and art, and the way humans formed emotional attachments. She was curious about everything, approaching each new experience with wonder and fascination. One evening, Brenner decided to cook for her, something his mother had always done when trying to create intimate moments with his father. He wasn't sure if Kestra could eat human food, but when he asked, she expressed eagerness to try. "Your species consumes plant and protein matter to generate energy, correct?" she asked, as he prepared the meal. "Yes, but it's more than just energy transfer," Brenner replied, enjoying the opportunity to explain human experience through food. "When we share a meal, it's a way of showing care, of creating togetherness. The food itself carries intention and love." As she tasted his preparation, a delicate dish of grilled proteins and roasted vegetables, her crystalline form flushed with warm colors. "This is extraordinary. The sensory engagement is remarkable. I did not know such sensations were possible." "How are you able to taste?" Brenner asked, fascinated. "Your physiology is so different from ours." "We absorb external matter through our crystalline matrix," Kestra explained, her form becoming more animated. "It is usually a utilitarian process. But what you have created carries something else within it. Information about you, about your intentions. I am not just tasting food. I am tasting your care, your desire to create something meaningful for me." Brenner felt heat rise in his chest at her words. Without fully planning to, he reached across the table and took her crystalline hand. It was cool but not cold, and it responded to his touch by becoming slightly warmer, her colors brightening. "I want you to know something," he said softly. "I'm not doing this just because your mother asked, or because it's biologically necessary. Somewhere during these past days, I started wanting to do this because of you, because of who you are as an individual." Kestra's entire form seemed to glow at his words. "I have experienced what your species calls emotion for perhaps 3 days now. My people do not typically feel as you do, but since meeting you, I am overwhelmed by something I cannot classify. My internal states are in constant flux. My processing patterns are altered. I believe your species would describe this as happiness. I believe I might be experiencing the precursor to love." They moved closer, and Brenner found himself wondering how physical intimacy would work between two such different beings. As if sensing his uncertainty, Kestra spoke, her voice becoming almost vulnerable. "My mother explained the biological process, but I am hoping that we could discover our own way of bonding, that we could create something that is uniquely ours, rather than following only biological imperative." Brenner leaned forward, and though her face was crystalline rather than flesh, when his lips met her surface, he felt something shift. Her form warmed considerably, colors flooding through her structure in cascading waves. She made a soft sound, something like a musical tone, that resonated through the space between them. As the breeding cycle approached, Brenner noticed physical changes in Kestra. Her crystalline form began to take on different properties, becoming less rigid, more malleable, almost luminescent with internal energy. Senna explained that this was the cycle beginning, Kestra's physiology preparing for bonding. "She is entering the threshold state," Senna told Brenner one morning. "Within days, the transformation will become irreversible. If she has not bonded by then, the process becomes destructive rather than restorative." But Brenner was beyond questioning his commitment. What had begun as desperation and biological necessity had transformed into something genuine and powerful. He loved Kestra, not despite her alien nature, but partially because of it, because she represented something transcendent and new. When they came together physically, it was nothing like human reproduction. Kestra's form became increasingly malleable, their bodies interweaving in ways that seemed impossible but felt completely natural. As they bonded, Brenner felt a strange sensation, not painful, but transformative, as though his own genetic material was being exchanged with hers at a molecular level. Kestra's colors became impossibly vibrant, cycling through spectrums Brenner had never seen before. She vocalized continuously, not in words, but in musical tones that seemed to express pleasure, satisfaction, completion. He could feel the transformation happening within her, the breeding cycle activating and finding what it needed through their union. "I feel alive," Kestra gasped between tones. "I feel so completely, intensely alive. My consciousness is expanding. I can sense your genetic material integrating with mine. I can feel our future forming. Brenner, this is extraordinary." When they finally separated, both were transformed. Kestra's crystalline structure had taken on warmer coloration permanently, no longer pure blue and purple, but infused with amber and gold. Her form had become more defined, more individually characteristic. And Brenner found himself changed, too. His skin held subtle iridescent qualities when light caught it certain ways. His perception slightly altered, as though he'd been genetically rewritten at a fundamental level. Over the following weeks, they discovered the full extent of their bonding. They could sense each other's emotional states across distance. They could feel each other's thoughts forming at the edges of consciousness. They were not just coupled, but genuinely merged at the genetic and neurological level. Senna watched her daughter transform from a being facing death into something radiantly alive, and she wept crystalline tears that caught the light like diamonds. 3 months after their bonding, Brenner and Kestra discovered something unexpected. They were pregnant. Not through normal human reproduction, but through the biological fusion their bonding had created. Their combined genetics were generating new life, something that was neither fully human nor entirely Sethrani, but a hybrid of both species. The colony's medical advisors were baffled. Such cross-species reproduction was theoretically impossible. Yet here was physical evidence contradicting everything they thought they knew about genetic compatibility. But Brenner and Kestra didn't care about scientific impossibility. They were too busy preparing for the birth of their child, a being who would exist in unprecedented ways. "What will we name her?" Kestra asked one evening, her crystalline form nested against Brenner's human body in a way that would have seemed impossible weeks earlier. "I want to combine both our traditions," Brenner replied, "something that honors where she comes from." They settled on Sethenna, combining Brenner's family name with Kestra's species designation. And when Sethenna was finally born, she was beautiful in ways both species recognized as profound. She had Kestra's crystalline structure, but warmed with human-like fluidity. She had Brenner's capability for emotional expression, married with Kestra's natural luminescence. Senna held her granddaughter and wept again, this time with joy rather than desperation. Page, word of Brenner and Kestra's bonding spread throughout the Outer Rim colonies. What had begun as a desperate plea for help became a story of transformation, of love transcending biological boundaries. other cross-species pairings began to emerge, inspired by the proof that such unions were possible. But for Brenner and Kestra, the significance was entirely personal. They had been brought together by necessity, but they had chosen to build something more. They had created not just a solution to survival, but a genuine partnership that redefined what love could mean across species lines. 5 years later, as they watched Sifena play with the hybrid offspring of other cross-species couples, Brenner would pull Kestra close and whisper, "Do you remember when your mother asked if anyone would mate with her daughter?" Kestra would glow with warm amber colors and reply, "I remember, and I remember that you were the only one willing to see beyond biology, willing to choose something unprecedented, willing to love me, not as a solution, but as a person." Brenner would kiss her crystalline forehead, and they would stand together, watching their daughter and her generation. Proof that some bonds transcend species entirely, that love has the power to create entirely new forms of existence, and that sometimes the greatest adventures are those we never planned for, but choose to embrace completely.